Welcome to In Such a Time, conversations on Jewish life, leadership, and meaning. Each week, Rabbis Jonathan Jaffe and Liora Landi explore the moments, questions, and ideas that shape who we are and who we aspire to be. And now, for this week's conversation.
We are pleased to share our clergy's high holiday sermons with our podcast audience. In my Rosh Hashanah morning sermon, I make the case for prioritizing Jewish needs after October the 7th. Enjoy. I'm hoping to use this morning's platform to work out something that has been on my mind, but I have a feeling that it might be weighing on you too, along with so much of the emotional baggage that we carry into the congregation today. Actually, my question comes in two parts. This morning, I'll focus externally and fittingly on Kol Nidre, turn the focus inward. Today I wish to ask, in a post-October the 7th world, what do we Jews owe the world around us? Perhaps this question is best framed by two separate posts which have appeared on my social media feed and perhaps on yours. The first they came for the LGBTQ and I stood up because love is love. Then they came for the immigrants and I stood up because families belong together. Then they came for the Black community, and I stood up because Black lives matter. Then they came for me, but I stood alone because I am a Jew. Or a related one. You've been scared of racism, and I've stood with you. You've been scared of sexism, and I've stood with you. You've been scared of anti-LGBTQ hatred, and I've stood with you. Now I'm scared of anti-Semitism. Where did you go? While admittedly simplistic, these posts speak to the frustration, the confusion, the humiliation, and anger held by many of us who feel as though after decades of bridge building, many of our interfaith and intercommunal partners now offer a tepid response in the face of skyrocketing anti-Semitism. Or perhaps it is the dissonance many of us feel between a post-October the 7th world of fear and isolation, one in which we require a robust security team just to gather here today, and the carefree, blissful lives led by many of our neighbors. We ask ourselves, why doesn't the larger world share our worries about anti-Semitism and the demonization of both Jews and Israel, the way that we have been asked to share others' pain and others' concerns? There are so many examples from which to choose, like how this year's Brooklyn Pride Interfaith Service was canceled after Jewish organizations were notified that Zionists were not welcome, or when Jewish communities were forced to pull out of this year's San Diego Pride event when organizers refused to consider the headlining performance of R&B singer Kehlani, despite her statements of long live the Intifada and directing F-slurs towards Israel and all Zionists. Or college clubs representing a myriad of cultures and interests at dozens of universities refusing to engage with any group that won't first disavow Israel. Or a Los Angeles chapter of Black Lives Matter, which the local synagogue supported from its very founding, posting pro-Hamas flyers complete with images of paragliders as made infamous by the October the 7th terrorists. I could continue with an endless litany of Jews being left to fend for ourselves, face anti-Semitism alone, or told that our participation in interfaith or intercommunal collaborations is no longer welcome, or is at least predicated upon the renunciation of any connection with our ancestral homeland. In my most fragile moments, I ask, has it all been worth it? If the larger world is unwilling to stand with us, just as we have stood with them, or simply see us for who we are, then maybe we should abandon our efforts and instead just focus on our own needs. But then I think of something that my friend and teacher Rabbi Shai Held taught me. The Passover Seder tells a similar story of abandonment in which the Jewish people suffer in the agony of slavery for 400 years, with no one coming to their aid. It is only when God hears their cries that the Israelites are led out of Egypt. Rabbi Held points out that perhaps we may have said, because no one cared for us when we were strangers in Egypt, we therefore have no responsibility to the rest of the world. You do you and I'll do me. And if anyone criticizes our self-interest, we can merely point out that no one helped our people, so why should we act any different? But as we know, the Torah teaches exactly the opposite. Because we were slaves in the land of Egypt, because no one came to our aid, we therefore know the plight of the stranger and are bound to care for the stranger among us today. The ultimate lesson of the Torah is to never let ourselves become Egypt. Suffering, abuse, or neglect does not give one license to commit the same to others. For this reason, the commandment to care for the stranger is repeated no less than 36 times in the Torah, far more than any other. The trick, as always, is to find the middle ground. We should never feel ashamed for pursuing our own self-preservation or demanding that we be included without strings attached. At the same time, we ought not build a wall of separation from the outside world. But how do we navigate between these two poles? The 2nd century sage Hillel famously asks, Im ein ani li mili, if I am not for myself, who will be for me? Uksha ani la'atzmi ma'ani, but if I am only for myself, what am I? Ve'im lo achshav imatai, and if not now, then when? Hillel teaches us that we have every right to prioritize our own community. There is nothing sordid about taking care of our family. But taken to the extreme, our sense of self-preservation will be self-destructive if we fail to extend our hand to those in need. That's when we become Egypt. Despite what our base instincts may say, a radical turn inward will rob us of the fundamental essence of who we are. I would like to posit today that American Jewish history offers a lesson in parallel extremes, divided between two eras: the Jewish self-preservation of the late 19th and much of the 20th century, before giving way to an overtly universal focus over the past 50 years. Today we stand at the crossroads between the two. Let's begin with that first era, when the majority of Jewish immigrants, our great-grandparents and great-great-grandparents, came to this country beginning in the 1880s. They faced incredible needs. Miraculously, a myriad of organizations were created to help Jews help other Jews. The Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, Hebrew Free Loan, Jewish Community and Family Services, the Bureau of Jewish Education, Jewish Vocational Services, and so on. These groups were formed by Jews to bring, house, educate, employ, and connect fellow Jewish refugees. Just take a moment here. Raise your hand if someone in your family received support from one of these organizations. And those are just the ones that know it. If you have relatives that came to America between 1880 and 1910, chances are that they relied upon one of these organizations that were founded to help Jewish refugees. In the 20th century, this mission expanded to the global Jewish community. First, it was immigration to and establishment of the State of Israel, then Soviet refuseniks and Jews being evicted from Middle Eastern states, and then the imperiled Ethiopian Jewish community. But somewhere right around 1975, it began to feel as though many of these challenges had already been met. Israel felt at least somewhat secure and established. Here in the United States, anti-Semitism weakened to the point that some naively wondered if it might just disappear altogether. Without a common project, What now would serve as the galvanizing force to pull the Jewish community together? The answer came through a two-word Hebrew phrase, which we all know well, but I think we need to talk about: tikkun olam. Commonly translated as fixing the world, tikkun olam is based on a particularistic spiritual term, tikkun olam b'malchut shaddai, pushing the world towards the coming of God's salvation. But in the modern context, tikkun olam became shorthand for doing good in the broadest sense, most often through supporting the less fortunate of the non-Jewish world. This term became so ubiquitous, so central to American Judaism, that for the past 50 years, we have repeatedly taught our children that tikkun olam stands at the very core of what it means to be Jewish. When I speak with congregants about their own Jewish journey, chances are that they will tell me that tikkun olam centers their Jewish identity. Perhaps this pivot towards tikkun olam is best crystallized by the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society's declaration: "We used to take refugees because they were Jewish. Now we take them because we are Jewish." In his seminal study, The Place of Tikkun Olam in American Jewish Life, Jonathan Krasner demonstrates how before 1975, the phrase tikkun olam was virtually non-existent in Jewish discourse. That may come as a surprise to some of us who were not alive before then. Terms like chesed, klal Yisrael, teshuvah were much more familiar. But as the American Jewish community's focus turned outward, the term exploded in popularity. By the time I was growing up in the 1980s, tikkun olam had become the de facto basis for non-Orthodox Jewish identity, cited frequently among even non-Jewish leaders like Mario Cuomo, Bill Clinton, and Barack Obama. It took the place of halakha, Jewish observance, as the defining feature of Jewish life. Synagogue tikkun olam committees were created, tikkun olam curricula written, and conferences founded. The 1999 platform of the Central Conference of American Rabbis was updated to say, "Partners with God in tikkun olam, repairing the world, we seek dialogue and joint action with people of other faiths in the hope that together we can bring peace, freedom, and justice to our world." Let me be clear. Seeking to help others is a laudatory and necessary goal. In the packet on your chairs, there's an entire list of tikkun olam activities, and that is a good thing. However, I worry about the corrosive effect of 50 years of making tikkun olam the foundation for being Jewish. Let's explore why. First of all, while tikkun olam connotes an ambiguous definition of acting with Jewish intent, there's nothing uniquely Jewish about it. If a non-Jew performing any meritorious act constitutes tikkun olam, how can this serve as the foundation for Jewish identity? Second, and perhaps more controversial, the definition of what heals the world is completely subjective in nature. Two people can stand on opposing sides of an abortion rally and legitimately think they are each performing an act of tikkun olam. I can say that in a region dealing with the overpopulation of deer, shooting one is an act of tikkun olam. Or in the most perverse of cases, the perpetrators of heinous acts of murder. Think of the shooting of Charlie Kirk, Gabby Giffords, the members of the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, or even the acts of the 9/11 terrorists. They were all acting with their own twisted vision of tikkun olam. These people actually believed that their actions are healing the world. Third, tikkun olam may create an unbalanced and even prejudiced paradigm of the secure and comfortable Jew helping out the less secure and the less comfortable non-Jew, as if we did not have our own needs, and we know how others ought to be repaired or fixed. In this way, tikkun olam can act like synagogue singles groups. which are seldom dedicated towards supporting our single congregants as they are, but instead fixing their irresolvable blight of singlehood? How would you like to partner with a community that sees you eternally as a work in progress? Back when I lived in San Francisco, our synagogue ran a child literacy program with the local African American Baptist church. At one point, members of the church confided their frustration that our interfaith relationship was based upon Jewish haves offering charity to African American have-nots. It is for this reason that here at Bethel, all of our work with Antioch Baptist Church in Bedford is held on completely equal grounds, including shared teen and adult civil rights trips to the South. Many in this room have gone on these, to learn with and from one another. Similarly, and especially for younger Jews, enmeshed in progressive circles of oppressor versus oppressed framing, Tikkun Olam often operates from the initial assumption of Jewish power, and therefore may portray a Jewish state of guilt or indebtedness to others. At times, Tikkun Olam can create a facade which prohibits us from articulating and others from seeing Jewish vulnerability and pain. And make no mistake, this is a real time of Jewish vulnerability and of Jewish pain. Perhaps this is one reason why so many of our interfaith and intercommunal partners continue to demonstrate a blind spot when it comes to our fears and our needs. Taken together, while I firmly believe that Tikkun Olam efforts are beneficial and necessary, I also believe we have been mistaken in raising 2 generations of American Jews to understand Judaism almost entirely through this lens. I worry that in the process, we have made the ethic of Jewish self-preservation seem unsavory, with real-life ramifications, as it is as if we have demonized the question, Im ein ani li mi li, if I am not for myself, who will be for me? And that is an okay thing to ask. For example, I doubt that many LGBTQ college students need much urging to take a course in LGBTQ studies, or African Americans in African American studies, or even women to take a class in a women's studies department. And yet I have to ask, why does it seem so hard to convince our kids here to take just one college course in Jewish history or in Jewish studies? As I often advise our teens, while at college you will learn about the history and the culture of a range of societies, why not take at least one class to learn about your own? But my real question is, why is this so hard? How can focusing on our own story become such a low priority? I would argue that by learning our story, we are better able to understand and empathize with the struggles, the narratives of others. The same can be said when it comes to Jewish support of civic causes. Whereas the late 19th century witnessed a massive effort of Jews helping other Jews, in the era of Tikkun Olam, this is decreasingly the case. As author and commentator Dan Senor recently detailed in his State of Judaism address, quote, "The overwhelming majority of Jewish philanthropic dollars go to non-Jewish causes. Of 33 Jewish individuals on a Forbes 400 list with publicly reported charitable giving, no more than 11% of their giving went to Jewish causes." He continues, "I am not suggesting that Jewish generosity to the broader civic square come to an end, but I am arguing that it is time for a recalibration in favor of our community's needs. We need to strengthen our core specifically so we can play the role we are meant to play beyond it." This message rings especially true, especially for many of us here who have supported the universities from which we have graduated, only to watch them fail in their basic duty to protect the safety, the well-being of their Jewish students, our kids. Senor points to not only our ability, but our responsibility to advocate for Jewish needs alongside the welfare of others.
In all, I would argue that we American Jews spent our first century largely answering the first question, Im enan lili mili, if I am not for myself, who will be for me? As we became more comfortable both in America and abroad, we shifted towards answering the second, Uksha'ani la'atzmi ma'ani, but if I'm only for myself, what am I? But in a post-October the 7th world, both America and the world seem a little bit less safe, a little bit less comfortable. And so perhaps we ought to consider a third path somewhere in between. The good news is that we do not need to reinvent the wheel. The 3rd century sage Rav Huna taught amongst the exiled Jewish community in Babylon. Living as a minority in a diverse world not unlike our own, he was asked how he would prioritize the needs of Jews and non-Jews, specifically when offering subsidized loans to the poor. He taught, quote, "If a Jew and a non-Jew both come to borrow money from you, the Jew should take precedence. If a poor person and a rich person come to borrow money, the poor one takes precedence. If one of your relatives, if one of the poor of your city comes to borrow money, your relative, your city's poor, should take precedence." Now, Rav Huna could have simply responded, all of your support should just go to the Jew. But he doesn't. Instead, he argues that while we ought to prioritize our own needs, this does not in any way absolve us of our responsibility towards others. That is when we become Egypt. We need to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. In essence, Rav Huna reminds us of the same lesson we receive each time we get on a plane. In the case of cabin depressurization, we ought to secure our own oxygen masks first, before assisting others. Don't be ashamed to prioritize our own people, but don't think that is the end of our responsibility. What might this look like? Earlier this year, members of our Central Europe Jewish Heritage trip, many of which are here today, gathered for dinner at the Krakow JCC, an amazing institution which has sprung up amidst the ashes of destruction. Today, the Krakow JCC is helping to bring the Jewish community back to life, opening a preschool, holding weekly Shabbat dinners and services, and welcoming Polish young people who want to learn about their Jewish heritage. Just minutes from Auschwitz, it is nothing short of miraculous and symbolizes the ethic of Jews taking care of our own needs and our own family. Amidst our week-long visit to monuments of Jewish suffering and tragedy, the JCC provided much-needed uplift and inspiration for all of us. But that's not the end of the story. Having stabilized and served the needs of the Jewish community, the Krakow JCC turned to the needs of others. Over the past 2.5 years, the JCC has raised over $14 million to support the 400,000 Ukrainians who have arrived at their doorstep, 98% of whom are not Jewish. And it's not as if the Jewish people have a wonderful history of life under Ukrainian rule. Nevertheless, through the JCC, the greater Krakow community has come together to clothe, house, train, employ, and connect these refugees. It sounds very familiar to those Jewish organizations of the 1880s and 1890s. In leading this initiative, the JCC Chief Executive, Jonathan Ornstein, demonstrates a Hillel-esque path forward. He and his staff put on their own oxygen masks first, and once they were able, they turned and they helped others. This is the golden mean, and I believe what this moment requires of us. Before concluding, it bears noting that we are so fortunate here at Temple Bethel to be surrounded by compassionate and supportive members of the interfaith and broader community. Honestly, the past 2 years would have been much more lonely without the phone calls, the coffees, the check-ins with fellow clergy members, not to mention deeply held relationships with our school and government officials. I want to say unequivocally to them here, thank you. Each of them serve as reminders that the enslaved Israelites were actually not entirely alone, and that the revolution against Pharaoh began with the Egyptian midwives, Shiphrah and Puah, refusing to carry out his murderous decree. I want to publicly honor this kindness. But my gratitude truly swells when I think of the Bethel community and how we have carried one another in our shared time of need. May we continue to stand proudly as Jews and demand that our inclusion in communal spaces not be predicated upon the denial of our own vulnerability, nor the connection to our one ancestral homeland. May we invest in and build up sources of Jewish pride and Jewish identity, free from irrational guilt for pursuing our own self-preservation. And at the same time, may we continue to care for those beyond the Jewish community as our tradition and as our hearts dictate. And may the year 5786 provide sweetness, redemption, the return of hostages, a cessation of violence, and the peace for which we long with all of our hearts. V'im lo achshav imatai, and if not now, when? Shana Tova.
Thanks for joining us on In Such a Time. Make sure to subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts. To learn more about Rabbis Jonathan Jaffe and Leora Landi, or to connect with Temple Bethel of Northern Westchester, visit bethelnw.org, or follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Temple Bethel NW. Thanks for listening.